friends, it's Teresa and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be me talking about my thoughts on Crescent City, House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J Maas. Yeah, I know, I'm late. I feel like if you follow me on the channel for a hot minute, you know that I procrastinate on things that I potentially will enjoy, and that is one of these books. So, let's just get into the video before the shame sets in and we realize that I need to be better about releases. So before I get into the actual nitty-gritty of this book and review, I'm going to go ahead and list off a couple of trigger warnings that you should probably be aware of before you jump into this book. Trigger warnings probably isn't the full extensive list. These are kind of the ones that I noticed, and if there are any more that I have missed, you guys are more than welcome to add it in the comments for everyone to peruse and see and figure out what exactly these trigger warnings are. But we have discussions of death, actual death, blood and gore, we have trauma. It's more of a content warning than is a trigger warning, but trauma is definitely in there, slash kind of like not healing from trauma, not overtly punishing yourself because of trauma, but still some form of punishment, punishing yourself because of it. And then PTSD, which, you know, forms in with the whole trauma. Now moving on to the actual review. We're going to start off with the synopsis. Now, this is Sarah J Maas's debut into adult novels, especially high fantasy novels. She has written kind of close to new adult. I haven't finished Kingdom of Ashes quite yet, so right now my knowledge of her ability sits on just new adult, but I have heard that she does, like, her writing does transform into more adult literature as well. This is her official adult book. This is a high fantasy adult novel set in kind of a modern day setting. It follows Bryce, who has been reeling after the death of her best friends, and like all of her best friends, basically people she's called family. And 2 years later, she's kind of brought back into the fold of this mystery when they find out that the person who might have killed her best friend isn't actually the person who killed them. Basically, how I describe it to my partner was that this is high fantasy adult in a modern day twist, and basically all I have to do is think about every single thing, every single like popular mythology, like Norse, werewolves, even some biblical stuff in here, squish them into one world, make it modern, add a murder mystery element to it, and then throw in some sexual tension. That's basically how I described it, and I feel like it's a very accurate depiction of this book. So now moving into my initial thoughts of the book, or at least before I even bought the book, I was terrified. This is like 800 something pages. Not that that necessarily scares me, because I have read books with more pages than that in a shorter amount of time than it took me to read this book. I was scared to pick this up, not because even of Sarah J Maas's prowess, because we all know how she can write like a fantasy. She's good at it. It's her thing. So I wasn't afraid that she was going to be bad. I was more afraid that there was just a lot going on. Like, people were telling me there were fairies in there, then there were angels, and then there were mermaids, and I was like, those kinds, like, in terms of myths and like biblical settings, those three tend to stay similar to each other, just because like there's some myths that fairies came from angels and demons breeding, or angels and humans breeding, and then mermaids are part fairy, so it does like kind of follow this like line. But then people were talking about like werewolves, and I was like, oh, there are vampires, and then there are witches, and I was just very overwhelmed with the situation that was happening in the room. So I literally bought this when I got back. No, I bought this the same time I bought Chain of Gold, because it came out the same day. No, I bought it around the time they came out, and then I just didn't pick it up until now because I was literally terrified of how much stuff was going to happen in here. And yeah, it took me 2 months to read it, but that was because I got sick and then I had to move, and we all have rehashes over and over again, so I'm not even going to get into it. We're just going to jump into the things that I just did not like about this book. There are very few in between things, because, you know, I do love Sarah J Maas. I am trash for her writing, so it's not as if like this is news. I'm going to enjoy what she writes, but I think there was a lot of world building. Not so much in terms of like how the world works, but so much with like the mythology and everything else in between. She definitely created her own mythology and threw it in there, but then mix it with the other bits of mythology, and I felt like she was still explaining bits of the world as the book progressed. So it was like by the end of the book, I was texting Andrea and I was like, I still feel like there's a lot of things that she's telling us, by this end, and that shouldn't have been the case. I feel like she should have either waited until the second book or just kind of kept it like in the beginning of the book, or like just explained it better, because it was just a lot of world building, and it wasn't confusing per se once you get in like the kind of the swing of the book, but it was just a lot of knowledge always getting thrown at us. Like there were instances where I would like get into the book and into the vibe, and then more world building get thrown in, and then it just kind of repeat itself. So I feel like there's just a lot of world building, and while I didn't mind it, it was definitely not done in a way that made it really easy to digest and really easy to understand. So that was one of the things that dinged me. Another thing that dinged me is like non-spoiler, because this is a spoiler-free review here, is that I feel like there's a big reveal toward like the end of the middle of the book, toward the end of the book. And while I love big reveals, I do, how this reveal was kind of formatted felt a lot like a cartoony reveal. Like we had the big bad guy tying up the good guys and explaining his plot and what he did and yada yada yada, and like it just felt very cartoony to me. And like I liked the format of how everyone kind of found out, but I feel like there should have been a moment where someone else in the series figured out exactly what had happened and maybe had provided explanation to the other characters, rather than us having to sit through basically like 100 pages of explanation. It wasn't like the scene, like the progression of the scene is probably like 100 pages, but like the explanation of what happened took a long time, and I feel like that could have been cut down significantly. They figured them out themselves, and that kind of took away the enjoyment of like the murder mystery, because we literally, in a metaphoric speaking, had them tied up and then had what exactly had happened over these past 2 years thrown at them. And I was just like, this works, but also I feel like I'm watching a Disney Channel movie. Which isn't a bad thing, but this is like different caliber to a Disney movie. Now, as for things I did like, I really like the relationships in here. I think Sarah J. Maas just has a talent of creating wonderfully complex and layered and amazing relationships, whether it's platonic or romantic. There were instances where you feel like someone might have not been a big part of someone else's life, and then as the story progressed, you learn that they have this very deep and meaningful friendship or relationship before, and it brings more to like not only the characters' like personality and the characterization, but also just a lot of like different layers to how like the story will unfold and become itself, and I really enjoyed that. I feel like the personality of the main character Bryce and the personalities of every character also is another thing that Sarah J. Maas has a strength in. She can create these characters that stand up against themselves, and you don't really like confuse them for one another, except for maybe some of the higher angels. Like the Isaiah and Micah, I confused for a little bit because you couldn't really like, they have very stoic personalities until like about the very end, so it was just a little weird. But I really enjoyed all the personalities, and like even the people who were kind of mentioned on page after the first like 80 pages, you had a clear image of who they were as people in your head. You had a clear image of what their likes were, what their dislikes, who loved them, who didn't, and it was just a wonderful thing to read about in these 800 fucking pages. And I really enjoyed that about Sarah J. Maas's writing, that she can create these wonderfully lush and complex characters and make us really get attached to them and fall for them. I want to say in a short amount of time, but this is not a short book, but in like the amount of time that it takes us to like get to know the characters feels really short. I should have seen it coming parts, while I did, like there were a lot of them in this situation. While they were like very cliche, I should have seen it coming situations, as Sarah J. Maas's books tend to be. She has a lot of cliche plot points. She always does them in a way that I literally sit there and I'm like, I didn't notice that this was a cliche plot point. I didn't notice. How did I not notice? This is a very cliche, and everything was written out for us, and I didn't see it, and I'm so surprised, and I'm so angry. But she always writes her stories in a way where you don't see the plot points coming, and even if you do, she writes the plot point in a way where you're like, oh, really love that about her, and I really love that about this book, because there were a lot of those twists toward like the end of the middle of the book and then all the way to the end, and I was still just like it's a trashy high like an adult novel, considering like just how the plot points work out and exactly what happens, which I can't spoil for you guys, but if you guys know, you know, just it's a vacuum, quite literally. But she writes them in a way where it's enjoyable and you don't feel like you lost a couple of brain cells reading it. You just kind of get really invested and you're like so focused, and then the thing happens and you're like, well, that kind of really fit for the character, even if it was really kind of like repetitive and plot pointy and like things we have seen before. She just brings something to the table every time. For my last point, and the last thing I liked about this book, the sexual tension. We all know Sarah J Maas writes a lot of smut, but this book was like 90% sexual tension and maybe 5% of things actually happening, and the other 5% of things being interrupted. Yeah, it was like the 5% canceling each other out, because it'd be like stuff would start to happen and then something would happen to cancel out that. I'm just sitting here like, yeah, the sexual tension in this book was just like, it's up there. But that's also like Sarah J Maas's like specialty in her novels. She just has a lot of set characters that share sexual tension, and sometimes they have sex on page, and sometimes they get there and someone makes a phone call and things kind of get messed up. But overall, I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. Things that dinged me were the world building and then the final reveal. Like, I feel like I should have dinged it a little bit more, but like just how kind of like addicting this book is and how the relationships are for me, I couldn't ding it more than just 1 star. I highly recommend this book. It's a very addicting read once you get past like the first 80 pages, which is what everyone says about the book. So I highly recommend it. It is a bit of a thicker book. It's 803 pages, I think. Yeah, it's 803, including the acknowledgments. So it's a biggie, but like I think that in terms of like a debut, like a high fantasy adult novel, and something with so much mythology and a lot of writing, this is a pretty accessible read. With the exception of just the mythology, it's a really quick and easy read to get through. If you've read Sarah J Maas before and you've enjoyed her writing, you can definitely pick this up and be okay. Like, even if you don't read adult high fantasy. But I feel like if you haven't read Sarah J Maas before, you might want to be a little bit wary about going into this book, just because, like I said, it's a lot. So maybe pick up like her earlier works, which are still a lot, but it can help you kind of get into the groove of her writing a little bit more. But I highly recommend for anyone who's looking to like maybe dip their toes into adult high fantasy and want something a bit more accessible, albeit confusing, but also I feel like most adult high fantasies tend to be confusing sometimes, so she hit it there. So highly recommend. I would also suggest to be a little bit wary of the trigger warnings. I don't have a full definitive list of all the trigger warnings. These were the ones that I mentioned or noticed as I was reading. But if you are a little bit sensitive to these topics, or they might make you really upset or put you in a really bad mindset, keep that in mind and then just pick it up when you are in a more appropriate mindset. But that is it for this video. I really had a nice time reading this book. I can't wait for the second one. Will I pick the second one up as it's released? Who knows? Will I read it when it's released? Who knows? But I really like reading it. I'm kind of kicking myself in the butt for not having read it when it first came out, but this is my channel, and we've been all known that I either read books as they come out as new releases, or I read them several months or several years later after the hype has died down. So, but if you like this video, hit like, subscribe, comment. If you guys have read this book, let me know you guys' thoughts, or if maybe this review has gotten you to maybe pick up the book in the future or read any others of Sarah J Maas's books, let me know. Other than that, everything that I mentioned, from the link to the book, the trigger warnings, I'll try to find that website that lists trigger warnings, maybe I can find a more comprehensive list and I'll list it there. And then my social media links will be all down below, so yeah. But until next time, I hope you guys are having a wonderful week, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!